Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm your host, Perry Rarick. The purpose of this interview series is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing business leaders. They're innovative, thought provoking, they're experts in their field, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. My trailblazer guest today is Greg Ippolito. He is the president and creative director at IMA, a B2B digital agency outside of the Philadelphia area. He's a 25-year veteran. He has developed award-winning campaigns and marketing strategies for clients as varied as Hyundai, Shire Pharmaceuticals, Vertex Incorporated, Sony Electronics, and Premier Dental. He speaks at various industry events about digital branding and lead generation. He's really an evangelist in this area. And he is a contributor to publications including Adweek, Marketing Daily, Technically Philly, Chief Marketer, and many more. He's a prolific writer, and his website is loaded with some of the best blogs I've ever encountered. His writing is great. It is entertaining, thought-provoking, and educational. We'll mention it again at the end, but I'm just going to throw it in there right now. His website is ima314.com. The best blogs in the industry. Greg, welcome to the Trailblazers.
Harry, thank you. I'm humbled. That was you talked me up big.
Well, you live up to every bit of that. So you are truly a trailblazer. I love what you're doing there, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're
Excellent.
going to hear some things from Greg that you normally don't hear from folks in marketing agencies or media agencies like you have. So, Greg, he this is an agency he founded. He heads it up right now. And he's going to tell you a little bit about what agencies get wrong and what they should be doing for their clients. He's going to introduce us to an approach he refers to as the left brain, right brain approach to things. It's a strategy. We're going to hear a little bit about the better use of data in support of marketing communications. I'm going to ask him a little bit about momentum marketing, which is very interesting. And then we're going to get in a little detailed about something called digital brand activation. But first and foremost, Greg, why did you start your own agency? You've been around this industry a lot. You were with many other organizations, but you decided to go out on your own and create your own agency. Why was that?
Yeah, well, in a way, it's the oldest story in the book where you and some other frustrated leaders are having a rough time at an agency, and you're out at a happy hour one night and you get disgruntled and you start saying, we could do this on our own. So you've heard that story a million times. The slightly longer story is that because I was 42 years old when I did it, I took my good time getting there. So it wasn't something I did, spontaneously or capriciously. I got into advertising and marketing as a writer, and I got into it a little late. When I graduated from college, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was traveling around, trying different things. I was really kind of lost. I knew I had a talent for writing, but I had only ever thought of it as really a hobby. I didn't, for some reason, I hadn't put together that you can make a living doing it. Once I figured that out, I just started writing for anyone who would pay me, newspapers, magazines, in some cases, ad agencies. And I found that advertising copy was what I really loved to do. It was fairly lucrative compared to some of the other ways you can make a living. So I got and when I'm Perry, when I first got my first average junior copywriter job, and I was brought into and introduced to the creative department. I didn't realize these things existed. So I'm brought into this whole floor in this building, and there's writers over here and designers over here and production people and project managers. I thought I died and went to heaven. Like there's a whole department dedicated to creating things. They're going to pay me to do this. It was absolutely amazing. So that's really where I come from. That's my that's my impetus for why I'm here, and I've always been, for the longest time, a worker, just trying to create stuff that's innovative and valuable. And the thing that's lovely about and exciting about advertising and marketing is you don't have to wait to find out how valuable your creative is. It goes out into the world and then people respond to it or they don't. So you you succeed or fail in real time in the real world, and then you take your notes back and you try again. Sometimes you get lumped up, but it's just an exhilarating way to be. So to get to your question, I know I'm taking the long route, but I always found it really frustrating when I rubbed up against the business end of the agency, which was how can we upsell the client? How can we sometimes clients would come in and it was clear from the first sit down that we weren't the right place for them. I remember sitting in one meeting and hearing a client describe, a CEO, not a marketing person, describe the issue they were having. And my brain was just screaming, they need a great PR firm first and foremost. And then everything else will follow. But that was their number one thing. That potential client leaves and the whole room just starts talking about, like, what services can we sell them? As opposed to who could we what PR firm can we refer them to? Because that wasn't something we did. And I just felt like I understood the business end of it. You're there to make money at the end of the day. But it always felt like as the worker, as the writer in the cubicle working in the creative department, it was always to me about how can you help the client achieve their goal? And what can you put out into the world that's going to grab attention and engage and get people excited about what the client is offering? So this is all to say when I finally decided to open my own shop, me and my partner Bob, we promised ourselves that we were never going to do that. And we also had a sort of philosophy that if you to use a basketball analogy, some of the greatest coaches, Greg Popovich, who just retired, Larry Brown, these guys always talked about playing the right way. That it doesn't matter if we lose tonight on the floor, you play the right way over time, everything's going to work out. You're going to be a successful organization. We felt like if we play the right way, we do right by the client, we always work hard, um, they're going to appreciate the work. And it's not about trying to upsell and cross sell or missell. It's not about the bottom line every time. It's about doing things the right way, and in time, that's gonna come back. They're gonna trust you, and you're gonna do good work, and it's gonna work out in the end.
Yeah, I mentioned that you're a prolific writer, and I found your blogs on your website just really valuable.
Thanks.
They're entertaining, they're thought provoking, and they're educational. That's what good marketing copy is.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it does make perfect sense as you describe it that way.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk a little bit about the left brain, right brain strategy
Yeah.
that you apply there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was we built the agency. I mentioned my partner Bob briefly a moment ago, intentionally because we were small. We can only handle so much. We didn't have our own production department or media department or whatever. So we started where we could be very effective, which was within digital. And we had just Bob and I had just come from a digital agency and really were I can say this looking back, honestly, we really were at the cutting edge of where things were back in 2013. We were leaders in the digital space at that point. So we thought, okay, he and his team that we built out really run the left brain, what you call the left brain side of things, the analytics, the keyword research, the audience targeting, all the logical analytical stuff you have to handle. And my team handled sort of the traditional creative stuff, content creation, video, design, writing, all of that. So we thought, well, great, we have both bases covered. My team can create all the content. Your team can get it out to the right audiences, and then we can analyze the results, and we'll go back and forth, back and forth. It wasn't until several years in when it kinda happened by accident that someone from Bob's team was looking at some of our creative and made a comment that none of us would have, and I can't even remember what the comment was, but it was a comment that none of us ever would have come up with ourselves. And I was like and the light bulb kinda went off that if you bring people from a different sort of a way of thinking into your world, it can bring insights that could be very valuable. And of course, like anyone who's working on a creative team, you know how it works. The writer and the designer create something, then you bring it to the creative director and he makes some notes and you change it. And then you bring it to the account executive. And then once they've bought off, then you bring it to the client. And no one outside of that very narrow, group of people has seen the creative. So we decided, let's start bringing both sides in on the other side. So when they're doing keyword analyses and deriving keyword lists, or they're doing audience targeting, or whatever it is that they're doing on their side, our team will come in and take a look at it, and we might see something in their data that they didn't realize, or we might see a potential intention of an audience member, for instance, given a particular keyword that they weren't realizing, and whatever. And same thing on the other side. We'll do creative, we'll bring them in. And like the example I mentioned before, they might see something in that none of the creative people saw, but because they're left brain thinkers, they tend to see it. So it did two things. One, it just brought amazing insights that were right here in house that we would have completely missed if we didn't just invite people to cross the hall and share in this. That was the first thing. The second thing was that, or is, that it just makes our work lives a lot more interesting and dynamic because you're not just doing one thing all the time. Now it's more work, but the day that you get to go across the hall and check in on the keyword list, or the day that they get to come across the hall and check in on, the first round of creative is kind of exciting. It's something that's outside of the norm for your job description. So it's made the work life more interesting and dynamic, and it's made what we do a lot more effective.
Yeah. Just a very clever, brilliant way of unsiloing, right at the foundation level.
Yeah.
The more you talk about what you do there, and it's probably not, this isn't gonna be the right way to describe it, but it's a systems approach or a philosophical foundation that
Yeah.
drives everything. So it's not just chasing some latest fad or tactic.
Absolutely. And it's also beyond that. It's sort of just we inherently understand the importance of diversity of thinking and diversity of staff and all of this stuff. So you bring people of different ages, different backgrounds, different political leanings, whatever. Everybody thinks a little differently. Everybody has a different story. Everybody grew up in a different town with a different set of parents, with a different group of experiences. So if you can bring as many different types you can bring in to look at something and react to it, I think it's more valuable for the organization and for the work. And I just want to do a quick footnote before we move on to another. For any of the neuroscientists or the neuroscience students out there, I understand that all of the logical thinking doesn't happen in the left hemisphere, and all of I know it's all intermingled. It's a metaphor. So I just want to, if there are any neuroscientists out there, like, scratching their skin right now over this, we understand it's a metaphor. So,
Great footnote. Yeah,
yes, thank you.
I have yet to have neuroscience pop up in one of these
So,
interviews.
well, there you go. This is the first time it pops up as a footnote. Mm.
Here's something I saw on your website I want to ask you about. I think you probably wrote it. Start with your audience's interests and tilt their momentum in your direction.
Yes.
That's different than let's broadcast loudly all this great news about ourselves.
Yep.
What does that mean?
Well, this is you're touching on the philosophy or the philosophical approach to this momentum marketing. And we wrote about this several years ago, and it is a philosophy more than it is a strategy or a tactic. But it is exactly the opposite of what you just mentioned, Perry, the idea of like broadcast to all, or for that matter, even if you are targeting a very specific audience, but you're going into it with the idea of arresting attention, or not that you don't need to arrest attention, but or disruption. That was a word that it still gets overused, but it was really being overused a few years ago. But the idea of constantly disrupting the marketplace with communications is kind of I I think it's a little disingenuous, because how often do you see true disruption? How often within your scroll or on television or whatever, or a billboard, you see something that truly makes you stop and go, "Whoa." I mean, it's once in a moon, right? So shoot for it, but so the idea of momentum marketing is that it's more efficacious and more efficient to try rather than trying to disrupt a marketplace or try to disrupt an audience and grab them. They're over here and you want to drag them over here to where you are. Look for the people that are already heading in your general direction. They're asking questions that you can answer, etc. And then tilt that momentum. If they're on Google, for instance, looking for answers to a question, they could find you or they can find one of your competitors. Tilt that direct, make sure they find you. And then once they get there, make sure you're answering their question in the most empathetic and engaging way possible so that they're having that aha moment. Doesn't have to be a disruptive moment, but like a soothing, oh, you helped me moment. And while they're having that physical reaction and that emotional and cognitive reaction to this new thing they just learned, they're looking at your logo and making that positive attachment to your brand. So that's the philosophy that drives us.
What a smart philosophy. That is I really love that. All right. So, data, we people in this business, we think data is going to answer all of our questions, and it certainly helps. There's a lot of data. If you're in digital advertising, there's a lot of data available to us for those who want. But you spoke about there's some inherent limitations, and there are smart ways to go about accessing this data to help smarten up your marketing
Yes.
efforts. So,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. As you just mentioned, Perry, what I started in this business in 1996. So it was like at the time, the internet was a novelty. You went on AOL online and you messed around, but it wasn't even central to marketing strategies. It was this novelty item over here. So I've lived in this world from, where data was, how well the last direct mail campaign performed, and data that was cleansed by some database company in Oklahoma, and then so like to where we are now, where we can dive in and look in real time at who's clicking what and do predictive analytics on audiences at a level that's absolutely stunning. So, this in no way tries to damper the importance of what data and the use of data has given us over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah.
But I think we have hit a little bit of a ceiling where, it's become commoditized. Everyone has access. If you were using certain tools even 5 years ago that your competitors weren't, you had an edge merely by way of the fact that you had access to this data and ways to manipulate it for your own ends. At this point, everyone has access to the same stuff. If you don't, you're practicing, marketing malpractice. So it now comes down to, all right, if you're going to succeed in this modern day and age, how to use data well, right? Because everybody's got mere access to the tools and the data itself is a foregone conclusion. So there are two limitations I see that if you go into it facing those limitations and acknowledging them, you can push through to the other side. The first is that data, by its nature, exists in the past. It just does. So now if you are not in marketing, if you're using data, excuse me, to say do crash test safety work, and you're driving a particular vehicle at a certain mile per hour rate into a wall, et cetera, you can do that test over and over and over again. And so long as you don't change the vehicle, you can anticipate, because the laws of nature, the physical laws of nature never change, you can anticipate what's going to happen if you run that test back again and again and again. So in that case, data being old isn't that much of a problem. But when you're talking about human behavior, a person clicking that they liked a certain post versus a different post, a person deciding to visit a web page and then bouncing off of that web page without scrolling, et cetera, that doesn't that can change from season to season, or as culture changes or something in your industry changes, that data is all. So I think we have this sort of, I think the left brain marketers out there, a lot of the people with MBAs, it would be very convenient, and it is very convenient for them to say, all right, looking at hard data, we can rely on that to move forward. What happened in the past can predict what happens in the future. And sometimes that's true, but often you can predict only in a short time into the future before that day, before people change. And then you need to change. So you need to constantly be testing and not just relying on old data, but looking for when the data starts to shift and asking the important question of what does that mean? Why did they respond to this then, but they're not responding now? And if you're not asking those questions, then you're relying too much on data alone and not enough on the blend of data and the meaning behind the data. And the latter part of that is something that we still need really smart human beings to gather around a table and discuss and hypothesize what this data can mean. So that's the first thing. And then the second limitation, and this kind of ties into the first thing a little bit, is that the data that marketers are using by its nature is data on behavior. All that stuff I talked about, clicks and this and that. It's what people did, even sales data. It's what people chose, it's what they did. What we are really no better at getting at than we were 15 years ago is the thinking behind the data. Why did they click that? Why did they choose that car over that car, whatever the case may be? And we had a moment in the mid late 2000s where psychographics, if you remember this, became a thing. It was like a cottage industry that was really growing. And the idea of like not just handing you a bunch of bullet points, demographic bullet points on the target audience, but psychographic bullet points, whether or not they went to college, where they lean politically, what area of the country do they live in, what is their attitude towards X, Y, and Z? Are they family people? So that you can have more of a personal understanding of where these people are coming from and what they may be thinking when they run into your communications and how they might react. So if you can anticipate that, you have a better chance of getting that click. Trying to get to the emotions and the thinking that precedes the behavior. And I still think we are way, way, way behind on that. Because again, when you're looking at data, you're looking at behavior and you're looking at behavior that happened yesterday or back from there. So if we can be, as long as marketers can be cognizant of that and keep asking really tough questions to try to unearth the unknowns behind those two things, you're going to be in good shape. But I find in my experiences that most marketers I interact with not only don't do that, but they've never really even thought about that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think that's my experience as well. So I want to start.
Yeah.
I I want to start at the end. So at the limits of data, it's very easy to determine the who that clicked. Okay. And a lot of, and as to your point, that's about as far as many people go because they have a name, they may have some contact information. Let's let's start working them, right? Let's
Right.
start pitching them. But you're saying that it's worthwhile to go a little deeper, and I'd like you to describe how can we start doing that? Who do you get in the room? What kind of questions do you
Yeah.
ask? What other data points can you look at that can kind of help you start at least hypothesizing like what's going on in this prospect's mind
Yeah.
prior to that click?
Yeah. No, that is a great question. And it is a lot of just hard work and strategic thinking. So just to give like one example, if you were to run a product launch campaign that involved a bunch of social media activity, ads, posts, etc. And you got the first batch of results back and you saw that as you will, that certain ads, certain posts, certain content will outperform others. Now, the typical reaction to this is, oh, post A, C, and E won, or one of them you'll determine is the winner of the control, and then we're going to test a bunch of stuff against the control, and that's a fine way of doing it. What we do here, though, is we'll take, first of all, we look for, and this is really splitting hairs here, but we find it makes a difference. We'll look for content that outperforms other content with degrees of standard deviation. And that's a whole mathematical thing that we get into. But if you know that post A outperformed post B, one or two or three standard deviations beyond the mean, or beyond the other post, then you know that that's statistically significant. It's not an accident and it's meaningful. Why is it meaningful? We don't necessarily know, but we'll know. So we'll look at that and say, oh, that we have something there. So we'll take the content that's the winning content or several winners, and then we'll bring it back to the table and say, okay, so far in building this campaign, here's what we know about the audience. Here's what we've gained in the first few weeks of running this campaign, additional insights that have come in. And now here are the winning social media posts, whatever it may be. Why do we think, knowing what we know about the audience, which is limited, but knowing what we know, why do we think these would be the winners? And then we'll start bringing it around the room and arguing. Someone might suggest something and it might not make sense to half the room. Someone else might suggest something and that kind of resonates. And we'll try to list out, two or three or four really strong hypotheses that we can all agree on. Usually it's less, usually it's like two, maybe three, where like you have unanimous agreement or close to unanimous agreement. Like, yeah, any of these three could really be the reason. And then we use those hypotheses to create the next round of creative. Okay, so if hypothesis number one is true, then they're going to respond to a message that's around this topic or with this tone, whatever. So we'll start creating creative pieces around hypothesis one, hypothesis, and then we'll put them out there. And if we start to see that in the second leg of the campaign, the content that was built around hypothesis two is outperforming the other two, now we got something. Now we don't know for sure, but we are much closer to understanding the emotions, the desires, the thinking that preceded that click than we were the first go around. So it's a painstaking sort of process, but that's what we're always trying to get after is what were they thinking, what were they feeling, and why did they take action versus let this thing just scroll through. So that's we're and again, there's if there was some magical piece of software that we could plug in and get that, obviously we would be using it, but since there isn't, we're doing the grunt work to try to figure it out as best we can.
I don't know if that will ever exist. It's,
I don't think so either. Without an fMRI machine,
uh, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like it's the left right brain strategy on full display in
Oh,
those,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
know,
Yes.
and it sounds like fun to me. Of course,
It's
it's
a lot
time
of fun.
consuming. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a little, it's a little, not precarious, I guess anxiety inducing because when you bring people into a room to talk about, why do we think people are responding to this? We don't know. We are guessing. So we're going, and then that's why the discussions follow and we try to come to some group consensus, and we it's like Socratic method at that point. We're poking holes in each other's reasoning, and then if people can make a really strong argument for their case, then it's like, all right, well, this is at least a strong enough argument to go and test. We're never going to like take a hypothesis, assume it's true, and just tilt the whole, but it's now worthy of a test, and it's been for us a really effective and fulfilling process to do it that way. We feel like we're able to unearth things about the audience that we wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
Yeah. It begins and ends with the audience, with the target audience. It's always
Absolutely.
uh,
That's number one, priority number one.
about almost a decade ago, you developed a concept called digital brand activation. Can you
Mhm.
introduce us to that? What does that mean?
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, happy to. So, yeah, about like you said, 10 years ago, we started to see a lot of brand activations popping up, especially at certain key events. CES was one of the first ones that was doing it. South by Southwest, and we're reading this in all the trade pubs, and some of them, were really cool. And I'm talking about like physical brand activations where a brand will build an experiential thing like event like an you think like a booth graphic, but like exponential, where you're literally walking into a little world that they create and being immersed in this in real life experience. One of the ones we remember that really caught our eye was there was this TV show, Mr. Robot, that was out about 10 years ago or so. And at South by Southwest in it was either 2015 or 2016, they built a replica of one of the sets from Mr. Robot where it was a show about hackers that were I don't remember exactly what they were trying to do, but they had this, like, little secret facility on Coney Island. So they rebuilt the whole thing where the attendees walked in and they can go into the little facility where the hackers work. There was a Ferris wheel, like it was a replica of a section of Coney Island, and it got a ton of buzz, and it was a lot of fun. And it was like, what a great way to raise awareness and excitement about a brand or a product or a TV show, whatever it is. But the left brain in my head was thinking, well, geez, what did that cost to build? And how long did it take? And how many people over the however many days that South by Southwest goes on, how many people were able to experience it? And granted, they got some social media buzz too, and they took video of it, so it extended out digitally. But like, the news cycle changes fast, and then people are going to be talking about something else next week. I thought about like, what was the return on investment for that? Like, how many people how many more people started watching that show and by extension, raising the ad revenues earned by that show, et cetera? Did it make up for what they built and the time and effort and expenditure they put into it? And then I started to think, well, what if you can create really cool, experiences, not just click here and get information, but really cool online experiences online, digital brand activations, things that could be built in a way that were not as immersive as a real life thing, but something where, like, one of those moments we were talking about before, where you suddenly are in an online portal or on a website or on an app, and you're like, "Whoa, this is really cool. What's this all about?" We've all experienced that, and in so doing, you're engaging with a product or with a brand, and you're investing time in it because it's entertaining and it's informational. If we could build things like that, we would be able to do it a lot more quickly, a lot more cost effectively, and if it's doing well and it's starting to generate leads and raise the awareness of a brand on behalf of one of our clients, they could run that thing for as long as they wanted to. We don't have to shut it down in 8 days because the festival's over. We can keep it going. So we came up with this idea of digital brand activation, which is the broad term for exactly what I'm talking about. They're different for every client. Within every client, they're different from campaign to campaign. We have some clients that run a different digital brand activation every quarter. We have some that will only pull it out, like, for a product launch. We have some that will pull it out if they have an older product or service that is not getting the attention that it should, and we wanna, like, give it a jolt and shine some light on it, we can do that. We have some that run ongoing digital brand activations that we go in and just tinker with the content a couple of times a year, maybe upgrade some things, try to keep it timely. So there's all sorts of different versions that you can do, but the impetus was, how can we take this IRL concept of the brand activation, make it go digital? And what's funny is, it got ignored for the longest time. I was writing about it. Don't you think this is a great concept? Getting someone to try to bite on it, and then it wasn't until the pandemic where people started to notice, like, oh, and it's like, yeah, in the absence of being able to do event marketing, or IRL marketing, like, all of a sudden, people were interested in digital brand activation. So, it took a few years to get any sort of, attention around that idea, but once people started paying attention, it started to take off.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. COVID changed a lot.
It did.
Well, you have a great case study on your website for Premier Dental or Premier Care, Premier Dental.
Mhm.
And I noticed a couple things. So great results. I mean,
Yeah.
you have it laid out there. Phenomenal results. Can you talk a little bit about what you did there, starting with the strategy? I noticed
Yeah.
the strategy was really heavy on understanding target audience, not just who they are,
Sure.
but a lot about their behavior.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about digital brand activation, plus some other things too. There were some ancillary services that we provide for that client. Um, but what we tried to do is, they're a dental products company, who, I mean, basically, when you go to the dentist, the stuff that your dentist or hygienist use, they create a lot of that stuff. So I'll talk in layman's terms because, I don't want to get into the clinical verbiage, but they have 2 broad audiences, which are the dental hygienists and then the dentist who tend to also be the practice owners or the partners. So depending on what sort of product we are promoting on behalf of Premier, we're either focusing very much on the dental hygienist community or the dentist community, dentist and business owner community, or sometimes a combination of both because if it's a dental hygiene product, it's a pretty low cost type of thing, like a polishing paste or, a scaler or something like that. The hygienist typically, and this comes down to understanding your audience. They typically have the purchasing power within, the dental practice to do that. They don't need permission. If it's something more expensive, like a heavy duty piece of equipment, they can't go and do that unilaterally. They need the owner to, of course, to say, "Yeah, okay, we'll invest in that." So sometimes we'll be promoting hygiene products, but we also need to include the business owners on those lists because, as they start to yell upstairs that, we really need this thing, we need to have persuaded that we can't rely on the dental hygienist to sell on behalf of our client. We have to make sure that we're selling the dentist as well and the business owner. So sometimes it can get really tricky strategically, but the case study that you mentioned was, I believe, 2 years of quarterly digital brand activations plus a bunch of ancillary services, SEO and extended social media services and whatnot that rolled up into, taking them from here to here in the space of 2 years. And, it was thrilling for us to help them out. They had just undergone a rebrand when they invited us on board, to talk a little bit about, enhancing their digital. And they were thrilled with our work, and we were thrilled that they trusted us to take them in that direction. And yeah, it really turned out to be a terrific case study for us and for them.
Uh, we like to throw around, marketers are great with, we have this lexicon that we want to impress people, and we don't even know what we're talking about most of the time. But on a high level, we do leads, we do demand gen, ABM, and all of this stuff, and it all gets mixed up. There's one term that I found, and it was in this case study, is one of the
Mhm.
goals was to build follower groups. What are they?
Right.
Why was it important, and how did you do it?
Sure. Well, this is mostly on the social side. So, um, and this was an issue that Premiere had with regard to some of their channels, their social channels, but not all. So there was, if memory serves, their Facebook audience was pretty strong. They had just launched their Instagram audience. This is back in like 2019, at 18 or 19. And their LinkedIn audience was, so. And then they, of course, were using Twitter, now X, and some other things. And so the first question was, where should we be spending the most time and effort and media budget? Do we equally spend among the 4 or 5, or do we target in? So we had to build some strategy there, and part of that strategy was, well, how are we using these different channels for different things? And what do we want to communicate on those channels? And who are most likely to become our advocates? And of course, that depends on the channel and depends on LinkedIn, you're much more likely to pull in the dentists and the business owners. On Instagram and Facebook, depending on age, you're much more likely to pull in the hygienist. So we had different strategies for each channel, and we decided to try to build robust follower groups within each of those so that, again, with all this great content we're putting out and inviting them to digest and absorb, we wanna make sure that we keep them coming back to stay engaged. I mean, if you're top of mind with them, they're gonna think of you when they need something new or when they're ready to make a change, and this is true of I think a lot of sales. This is the other thing, like the tie between marketing and sales, which gets forgotten. We were so siloed, we forget about what we're doing supposed to support sales. But I think the nature of a lot of sales, especially in B2B, is once you get a company or a client or whomever buying your product, if that product is good and they can rely on it, and it's changing with the times and all of that, When they need it, they're gonna reorder. So in the case of, like, dentistry, that's very much the case. They have stock on shelves, and when that stock gets low, they go online or they call their rep and they reorder. So we always see, for on behalf of Premier, an opportunity that, like, if someone's disgruntled and they decide they wanna make a change, that's an opportunity to swap out that piece of that shelf of their product with your product. And once you have that, you're not selling a product, you're selling reorders of that product for years, unless they get disgruntled with you, which you don't want to happen. So building these, going back to the original question, building these follower groups really comes down to building robust communities of hygienists and dentists relative to the different channels that are, without having to spend exclusively media dollars to reach them through micro targeting, which of course is a wonderful thing, and every brand should be doing it. But to have organic followers who are seeing the stuff that you're putting out there on a day-to-day basis, and now you're having a daily conversation with those people and updating them on important news that they might need to know about. Of course, updating them on important product updates that you might want to know, or just warm and fuzzy stuff, or DYK type of stuff, anything it may be, but you can engage them on a daily basis. And one of the things I think that gets overlooked with social media, from a brand perspective, is, it's maybe the only channel or medium I can think of where, unlike television, unlike email, unlike anything else, when the commercial comes, you're annoyed, right? Or when you see that email in your inbox that you don't, it's not from your friend, it's from X ABC company, you're like, delete. It's always a disruption, going back to the concept of disruption. It's annoying. And then you have to overcome the disruption with something really interesting, right? So you're already in a negative position. With social media, if someone decides to follow you, they've said, "Yeah, talk to me. I'll listen to your." It's a brand, but I want to listen to you, the brand, what you have to say on a daily basis. That's an amazing opening of the arms and a welcoming in on behalf of the client. If you can get people to do that, um, man, you've really hit something. So you have to make sure not to squander that opportunity, and you have to go about building follower groups, very strategically and empathetically. Because if your social media strategy is all about pushing product and trying to sell and annoying and creating white noise and annoying your audience, that's not going to do very well. But if you're giving them the content they want, need, and are anticipating, if they see your logo coming through their feed and they stop, to me, that's pay dirt. That's what you want to achieve as a social media marketer.
That's brilliant. I don't wanna go past that, too quickly. You're talking about, the kind of content to gain, well, to build a follower group and then maintain their attention. Something that, and we'll go back to something you spoke about initially, was you have to be where they are in terms of their interests.
Yes.
So you offered a couple examples. What How would you describe that in this case with, dental instrumentation and supplies? What kind of content were you talking about?
I don't want to get too much into that, because now we're getting into the analytics and of what we understand about those different audiences. And I think that gets a little Orwellian. But I will say this as sort of a counterpoint, or a different way of looking at the same thing. Um, we just engaged with a client, and I can't say their name, confidentiality and whatnot, but I probably shouldn't even say their industry just to be safe. But um, they came to us for a social media analysis, and they basically wanted to see what's working for us, what's not working, and where should we be spending media, et cetera, that type of stuff. And one of the things we found, and we find this quite often, is they were very heavy on product marketing and sales related content. Very, very heavy. Um, and one of the other things we found was that, when they shifted, and this was kind of accidentally, when they shifted that marketing content a little bit to the left, just a little bit to the left. So instead of saying, "Hey, click this link to learn more about product X," if they said, "Oh, we're going to do a webinar in 2 weeks that's going to be about this pain point," and within that webinar, they're talking about product X as a potential solution, but they're talking about strategies to overcome that problem. They did a lot better at with those types of posts, engagement wise, registration wise, than they did with just straight up trying to sell their product. So I said, you need more of this and less of this. Also, we found that the highest performing content that they were putting out there is what we call people behind the brand content. So when you see their employees at events, or when it was like a behind the scenes thing of like, Jane Smith over here, what she likes to do on the weekend when she's outside of work, like get to know you type of stuff. They were eating that stuff up. It humanizes the brand. It shows it's human content, human interaction. It's not about business. And interestingly enough, not only do we see that that content performs exceptionally well, as you would expect on Instagram, but it performs as well, if not better, on LinkedIn. So I think in a context where 90% of the messages, I'm using that facetiously, I don't know what the actual number is, but an overwhelming amount of the messages you're seeing on LinkedIn are buy from me messages, sales messages, marketing messages. When you see just a human being in their element, whether it be at work or outside of work, doing something, it's interesting to people. They want to know about fellow professionals, and it gives them a little bit of a break from the norm. So when I presented the idea that maybe they tilt a little more attention in that direction, not surprisingly, I think they were a little nervous about it because, well, what does that have to do with our business? And I said, well, it doesn't have anything to do with your products, but it has a lot to do with who works at your business. Who are the people, right? You're not buying from a logo, you're buying from human beings. If you get to know these people, if they feel likable to you, if they feel trustworthy, they're more likely to want to reach out and speak with maybe a sales rep who you don't know. But if I like these people, there's a better chance I'm going to like these people. So it's not that you replace sales messages or marketing messages with this type of thing. It's that you need the right blend of different types of content so that, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the goal is when you're scrolling through your feed and you see, a particular logo, you're going to stop and wonder, oh, what do they have for me today? And if you do nothing but like just push out, look, check out our product, people are, it's going to be white noise. They're going to ignore you, just like all those emails that you delete in the morning. You don't want to be that. You want to give them a rich palette of content that, um, they're gonna stop and pause and say, "I wonder what they have for me today. And then within that, you can insert, of course, you insert your marketing message and your product messages. You just have to have a nice balance. It can't be, that's why we have an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert, and, can't all be one thing.
Great, great advice. Just
Yeah.
super. I strongly agree with you. I treat all those emails, anonymous emails the same way. They go right into trash. Before I let you go, final question, or some advice you can offer. Maybe to that group of marketers that are feeling a little frustrated and they're heading off to the happy hour and
Right.
to be drawing up some plans. Maybe some neuroscientists. I don't know. What kind of advice would you offer somebody who's in the early stages of their career or thinking about doing something like this?
Yeah. Um, this may come off a little pedestrian, but it is the honest good advice I could give, being now 25, 26 years into my career. It's really two things. Two of the most important things. One is never ever stop worrying. Um, th- your industry is never going to change, is never going to stop changing and evolving. The world around you is never going to stop changing and evolving. As soon as you stop moving along with the world, you become a dinosaur. So, it may feel like a lot of work to be constantly trying to look ahead at what's changing, but it can be exhilarating if you're talking to the right people and you're looking at the right sources, because every new thing that happens, especially when it's something profound like AI or like search marketing happened, 20 years ago, it's like, oh my God, what's happening here? People are taking control of how they're getting information. How do we adapt to this? It can be frightening and scary, but it's also, again, exhilarating because with every new thing that happens, at a lower level, and especially at a profound level, it gives you an opportunity to sharpen your skills and do something you weren't able to do before. And now your job has changed, and you can embrace that and dig in. So yeah, that would be my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice, and this is probably really pedestrian. And again, from a Philadelphia guy, it's kind of that Rocky thing, but like outwork the other guy. Ne Always, if you dedicate yourself to just working your ass off, and working your ass off consistently, you're gonna be successful, because it's amazing to me how many people are watching the clock and waiting to go to happy hour, or waiting for Friday to collect a paycheck. If you're invested in what you do and it's a career, you don't have to love your career. I think that's a misnomer. You don't have to fall in love. But if you have something that you like, it's engaging, you're good at it, and you have a talent for it that you can develop over time and you can be successful, just lean into it, work hard, be the last guy to go home sometimes, not all the time, because there's family and friends and all that. But you will be successful if you out hustle. Going back to basketball, you out hustle the other guy, you're going to get that rebound most of the time. Not
Great,
always,
great
but most of
advice.
the time.
Great, great advice. How can our listeners get a hold of you? How can they find you?
Oh, you're welcome to, probably email's the best way. If I see an email, that says Trailblazers or something that's not clearly, a BS trying to sell me, I won't delete it, I promise. But you can get me at Greg, at ima314.com, and that's probably the best way to get me.
And your website is ima314.com.
Yeah.
Great website, lots of great blogs. Just work your way through that. You're going to come away with your brain will grow. You're going to be thinking about marketing a little differently than that.
I really
Greg,
appreciate it, Eric.
thank you very much for being with the Trailblazers. My guest today was Greg Ippolito. He is the president and creative director at IMA, a B2B digital agency. Greg, thanks for being with the Trailblazers today.
Thank you, Perry. It was, my pleasure.